All right, we are on part 5 of the Airman Written Test Bank. What component of an autopilot system applies torque to the control surfaces of an aircraft? Servo. What is the main purpose of a servo in an autopilot system? Move the control surfaces as commanded. Which channel of an autopilot detects changes in pitch attitude of an aircraft? Elevator. The elevator channel of an autopilot controls the aircraft about which axis of rotation? Lateral. What component is the sensing device in an electromechanical autopilot system? Gyro. A fully integrated autopilot controls the aircraft about how many axes? 3. Dutch roll, a combination yawing and rolling oscillation that affects many swept-wing aircraft, is counteracted with a yaw damper system. When operationally checking an autopilot system on the ground, after the aircraft's main power has been switched on, the autopilot should be engaged only after the gyros come up to speed and the amplifier warms up. Installed radio equipment is protected from damage due to jolts and vibration by shock mounts. Radio equipment is bonded to the aircraft in order to provide a low impedance ground and minimize radio interference from static electrical charges. When must the radio station license be displayed in an aircraft equipped with a two-way radio? When the aircraft is operated outside of the United States. When would a U.S. resident not be required to hold a Federal Communication Commission (FCC) restricted telephone radio operator permit to operate a two-way aircraft VHF radio? When flying or communicating within the United States. Part of the ADF system used on aircraft includes sense and loop antennas. When installing coaxial cable, it should be secured firmly along its entire length at 2-foot intervals. When must the emergency locator transmitter ELT battery be replaced other than reading the replacement date? When the transmitter has been in use for more than 1 cumulative hour. An emergency locator transmitter 406 ELT battery must be capable of furnishing power for signal transmission for at least 48 hours. The preferred location of an ELT is as far aft as possible but forward of the empennage. An emergency locator transmitter ELT is normally activated by an inertial switch or equivalent mechanism if subjected to a force of a prescribed intensity and duration. It must activate when the force is applied parallel to the longitudinal axis of the aircraft. How may the battery replacement date be verified for an emergency locator transmitter, ELT? By observing the battery replacement date marked on the outside of the transmitter. How may the operation of an installed emergency locator transmitter, ELT, be verified during aircraft inspection? By tuning a communications receiver to the civil emergency frequency and activating the ELT momentarily at 5 minutes after the hour. How long can aircraft fly without an ELT? 90 days. Static dischargers help eliminate radio interference by dissipating static electricity into the atmosphere at low current levels. Long-range navigation LORAN systems determine aircraft location by means of pulsed signals transmitted from ground stations. Aircraft antenna must be grounded to the airframe. VHF radio signals are commonly used in both VOR navigation and ATC communications. On modern large aircraft, what electronic device typically monitors flight parameters and performs autopilot functions? Flight management computer. In the landing configuration, GPWS typically monitors the radio, radar, altimeter, air data computer, instrument landing system, and landing gear and flap positions. In general, the purpose of an aircraft transponder is to receive an interrogation signal from a ground station and automatically send a reply back. When an antenna is installed, it should be fastened so that loads imposed are transmitted to the aircraft structure. After an automatic direction finding antenna has been installed, the loop must be calibrated. Doublers are used when antennas are installed to reinstate the structural strength of the aircraft skin. One antenna can be used for the radio range and standard broadcast bands in light aircraft because the two ranges are close together. What characteristics of the installation of a rigid antenna on a vertical stabilizer should be evaluated? Flutter and vibration. A gasket or sealant is used between the antenna mast and fuselage skin to prevent the entry of moisture. The preferred location of a VOR antenna on light aircraft is top of the cabin with the apex of the V pointing forward. The purpose of a localizer is to align the airplane with the center of the runway. Referring to Figure 15, what is the approximate drag load on an antenna with a frontal area of 0.125 square feet installed on an aircraft with a speed of 225 miles per hour? 2.069 pounds. Referring to Figure 15, what is the approximate drag load on an antenna with a frontal area of 0.137 square feet installed on an aircraft with a speed of 275 miles per hour? 3.387 pounds. A DME antenna should be installed on the aircraft in a position that will not be blanked out by the wing when the aircraft is banked. When bending coaxial cable, the bend radius should be at least 10 times the diameter of the cable. When installing a DME antenna, it should be aligned with the center line of the airplane. Referring to Figure 16, which of the antennas shown is a typical DME antenna? 1. Referring to Figure 22, what kind of antenna is this? This is a loop and sense antenna. Referring to Figure 16, which of the antennas shown is a typical glide slope antenna? 2. Referring to Figure 23, what is this antenna used for? This is an altitude encoder used with transponders. Referring to Figure 24, what kind of antenna is this? A dipole antenna. Referring to Figure 25, what kind of antenna is this? A canted antenna. Referring to Figure 26, where is the strongest signal for this antenna? Above the antenna. Referring to Figure 27, what kind of antenna is this? A radar beacon transponder antenna. Referring to Figure 28, what kind of antenna is this? An ELT antenna. Referring to Figure 29, what kind of antenna is this? A VOR and localizer antenna. Referring to Figure 30, what kind of antenna is this? A lightning detector system antenna. Referring to Figure 31, what kind of antenna is this? A marker beacon receiver antenna. Referring to Figure 32, what kind of antenna is this? A radar beacon transponder antenna. Referring to Figure 33, what kind of antenna is this? A VOR/glide slope antenna. Referring to Figure 34, what kind of antenna is this? A VOR/glide slope antenna. Same question again. Different figure. The addition of avionics and associated antenna systems forward of the CG limit will affect empty weight and useful load. How much clearance from the seat bottom is required when installing radio equipment under a seat? 1 inch with the seat occupied and subjected to maximum downward seat spring deflection. The purpose of a glide slope system is to assist the pilot in making a correct angle of descent to the runway. Fuel jettisoning is usually accomplished through a common manifold and outlet in each wing. The primary purpose of an aircraft's fuel jettison system is to quickly achieve a lower landing weight. The fuel jettison valve must be designed to allow flight personnel to close the valve at any time, and the fuel must discharge clear of the aircraft. Which of the following is employed to maintain lateral stability when fuel jettisoning? two separate independent systems. A fuel jettison system is required under certain conditions if the maximum takeoff weight exceeds the maximum landing weight. What regulations cover the requirements of this fuel jettisoning? FAR 14 CFR Parts 23, 25, and CAM 4B. Fuel is moved overboard in most fuel jettison systems by boost pumps. Fuel jettisoning past the limits prescribed by federal aviation regulations is usually prevented by dump limit valves or a low-level circuit. Which procedure must be followed when defueling aircraft with swept back wings? Defuel the outboard wing tanks first. What is the purpose of the pump crossfeed valve? Allow operation of engines from one tank. Normal fuel crossfeed system operation in multi-engine aircraft. Provide a means to maintain a balanced fuel load condition. How many vents, arranged so that they are not likely to become plugged at the same time, must be used in multi-engine fuel systems? 2. What is the primary purpose of the cross-feed system? It allows any tank to supply fuel to any engine. Fuel system components must be bonded and grounded in order to drain off static charges. How many engine-driven fuel pumps per engine are required for engines requiring fuel pumps? One fuel pump for each engine. A typical large transport aircraft fuel manifold system allows for many of the following. 1. All tanks can be serviced through a single connection. 2. Any engine can be fed from any tank. 3. All engines can be fed from all tanks simultaneously. 4. A damaged tank can be isolated from the rest of the fuel system. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all true. A fuel system must be designed to prevent fuel vapor ignition caused by lightning. What is the minimum distance allowed between a fuel tank and the firewall separating the engine? 1.5 inch. Fuel baffles are installed in tanks to prevent surging caused by changes in attitude of the aircraft. Many fuel tanks incorporate flapper valves to prevent fuel from flowing away from the boost pump or tank outlet when the aircraft is in a high G maneuver. Fuel heaters are used with systems for turbine engines to prevent ice crystals in the fuel from clogging system filters. A transducer in a fuel pressure system serves what function? Converts fluid pressure directly through a transmitter to the indicator. The use of turbine fuels in aircraft has resulted in some problems not normally associated with aviation gasoline. One of these problems is microbial contaminants. What is used in many aircraft to prevent bubbles in the fuel after it leaves the tank when atmospheric pressure is lower than fuel vapor pressure? Boost pumps. Which of the following precautions is most important during refueling operations? Fuel to be used must be appropriately identified. Before fueling an aircraft by using the pressure fueling method, what important precaution should be observed? The truck pump pressure must be correct for that refueling system. What flight safety related advantage does a pressure fueling system provide? Reduces the chances for fuel contamination. Aircraft pressure fueling systems instructional procedures are normally placarded on the fuel control panel access door. Pressure fueling of aircraft is usually accomplished through at least one single point connection. Which of the following may be used for the repair of fuel leaks on most integral fuel tanks? Riveting and resealing. How is the outlet fuel pressure regulated on a submerged, single-speed, centrifugal-type fuel pump? By the pump's design and internal clearances. What is one purpose of a fuel tank vent? To maintain atmospheric pressure. When inspecting a removable rigid fuel tank for leaks, what procedure should be followed? Pressurize the tank with air and brush with soapy water. If it is necessary to enter an aircraft's fuel tank, which procedures should be avoided? Conduct the defueling and tank purging operation in an air-conditioned building. What is the recommended practice for cleaning a fuel tank before welding? Steam clean the interior. An aircraft's integral fuel tank is a part of the aircraft structure. Which gas is used for purging an aircraft fuel tank? Carbon dioxide. Why is the main fuel strainer located at the lowest point in the fuel system? It traps any small amount of water that may be present in the fuel system. The purpose of a diaphragm in a vane-type fuel pump is to compensate fuel pressures to altitude changes. When moving the mixture control on a normally operating engine into the idle cutoff position, engine RPM should slightly increase before the engine starts to die. Entrained water in aviation turbine fuel is a hazard because of its susceptibility to freezing as it passes through the filters. What are common methods of preventing this hazard? Anti-icing fuel additives and fuel heater. As a general rule, which statement is true regarding fuel tanks? Stains, seeps, and heavy seeps, in addition to running leaks, are considered flight hazards when located in unvented areas of the aircraft. How much water is allowed in a U.S. gallon of turbine fuel? 0.0015%. The presence of fuel stains around a fuel nozzle would indicate clogged fuel nozzle. What should be used to inert an integral fuel tank before attempting repairs? CO2. What should be used to remove flux from an aluminum tank after welding repairs? 5% solution of nitric or sulfuric acid. What method would be used to check for internal leakage of a fuel valve without removing the valve from the aircraft? Place the valve in the off position, drain the strainer bowl, and with boost pump on, watch to see if fuel flows to the strainer bowl. Why are jet fuels more susceptible to water contamination than aviation gasoline? Jet fuel has a higher viscosity than gasoline. When installing a rigid fuel line, 1/2 inch diameter, at what intervals should the line be supported? Every 16 inches. The probe of a capacitance type fuel level gauge is essentially a capacitor with fuel and air acting as a dielectric. Which statement concerning electronic capacity type fuel quantity indicating systems is true? It has no moving parts in the tank. What type of remote reading fuel quantity indicating system has several probes installed in each fuel tank? Electronic. Which aircraft fuel quantity indicating system incorporates a single amplifier? Electronic. A drip gauge may be used to measure the amount of fuel in the tank. The electronic type fuel quantity indicating system consists of a bridge circuit, an amplifier, an indicator, and a tank unit. A probe or a series of probes is used in what kind of fuel quantity indicating system? Capacitor. Why is the capacitance fluid quantity indicating system more accurate in measuring fuel level than a mechanical type? It measures by weight instead of volume. One advantage of electrical and electronic fuel quantity indicating systems is that several fuel tank levels can be read on one indicator. A fuel totalizer is a component which indicates the amount of fuel in all the tanks. A digital fuel totalizer automatically indicates the amount of fuel used, fuel remaining, and current rate of consumption, and fuel weight aboard at takeoff. What is the dielectric non-conducting material in a capacitance type fuel quantity indicating system? Fuel and air in the tank. A capacitance type fuel quantity indicating system measures fuel in pounds. What are the 4 general types of fuel quantity gauges? Sight glass, mechanical, electrical, and electronic. How does temperature affect fuel weight? Cold fuel is heavier per gallon. One advantage of electrical and electronic fuel quantity indicating systems is that the indicator can be located any distance from the tanks. When fuel quantity is measured in pounds instead of gallons, the measurement will be more accurate by varying with temperature change. An electric type fuel quantity indicating system consists of an indicator in the flight deck and a float in the tank that moves a connecting arm to the wiper on a variable resistor in the tank. What is the purpose of a float-operated transmitter installed in a fuel tank? It sends an electric signal to the fuel quantity indicator. In an electronic type fuel quantity indicating system, the tank sensing unit is a capacitor. What must each fuel quantity indicator be calibrated to read during level flight when the quantity of fuel remaining is equal to the unusable fuel supply? 0. What unit would be adjusted to change the fuel pressure warning limits? Pressure sensitive mechanism. Select one means of controlling the fuel temperature on turbine-powered aircraft. Engine bleed air to heat exchanger. What is the purpose of a flapper-type check valve in integral fuel tanks? To prevent fuel from flowing away from the boost pumps. What unit is generally used to actuate the fuel pressure warning system? Pressure sensitive mechanism. What method is used on turbine-powered aircraft to determine when the condition of the fuel is approaching the danger of forming ice crystals? Fuel temperature indicator. Which of the following would give the first positive indication that a change over from one fuel tank to another is needed? Fuel pressure warning. A fuel pressure warning switch contacts close and warning light is turned on when the fuel pressure drops below specified limits. A transmitter in a fuel pressure warning system serves what function? Converts fluid pressure to an electrical signal. Where is fuel pressure taken for the fuel pressure warning signal on most aircraft engines? Fuel pressure line of the carburetor. Which of the following is necessary to effectively troubleshoot a fuel pressure warning system? The manufacturer's maintenance manual. Which of the following would be most useful to locate and troubleshoot an integral fuel tank leak in an aircraft fuel system? Maintenance manual diagrams and descriptions. In some aircraft with several fuel tanks, the possible danger of allowing the fuel supply in one tank to become exhausted before the selector valve is switched to the other tank is prevented by the installation of a fuel pressure warning signal system. The function of a fuel heater is to protect the engine fuel system from ice formation. Regarding the above statements, 1. A gas turbine engine fuel systems are very susceptible to the formation of ice in the fuel filters. 2. A fuel heater operates as a heat exchanger to warm the fuel. Regarding the above statements, both number 1 and number 2 are true. Regarding the above statements, 1. A fuel heater can use engine bleed air as a source of heat. 2. A fuel heater can use engine lubricating oil as a source of heat. Regarding the above statements, both number 1 and number 2 are true. You will see that answer more as we go on. Regarding the above statements, 1. A fuel pressure gauge is a differential pressure indicator. 2. A fuel pressure gauge indicates the pressure of the fuel entering the carburetor. Regarding the above statements, both number 1 and number 2 are true. A fuel pressure relief valve is required on aircraft with positive displacement fuel pumps. The primary purpose of a fuel tank sump is to provide a place for contaminants and water to settle with a drain valve to remove the impurities. Why are the integral fuel tanks used in many large aircraft? To reduce weight. When an aircraft is fueled from a fuel truck or fuel farm that has not been contaminated, daily draining of strainers and sumps is combined with periodic filter changes and inspection to ensure fuel is contaminant-free. When defueling an aircraft, which of the following must be accomplished? Always defueled outside the hangar. Integral fuel tanks on transport aircraft are supported by the aircraft structure. What precautions must be observed if a gravity-feed fuel system is permitted to supply fuel to an engine from more than one tank at a time? The tank airspaces must be interconnected. The purpose of the baffle plate in a fuel tank is to resist fuel surging within the fuel tank. What markings must be placed on or near each appropriate fuel filter cover on standard category aircraft? The word avgas and the minimum fuel grade. What is one disadvantage of using aromatic aviation fuels? Deteriorates rubber parts. Fuel boost pumps are operated to provide a positive flow of fuel to the engine. Flapper valves are used in fuel tanks to act as check valves. Why are centrifugal type boost pumps used in fuel systems of aircraft operating at high altitudes? To supply fuel under pressure to engine-driven pumps. Why is it necessary to vent all aircraft fuel tanks? To limit pressure differential between the tank and atmosphere. According to 14 CFR FAR Part 23, what minimum required markings must be placed at or near each appropriate fuel filler cover for reciprocating engine-powered airplanes? The word avgas and the minimum fuel grade. What angle should a fuel filler neck gooseneck be to ensure positive pressure? 90 degrees. The location of leaks and defects within the internal portions of the fuel system can usually be determined by observing the pressure gauge and operating the selector valves. What type of fuel booster pump requires a pressure relief valve? Sliding vane. To prevent vapor lock in fuel lines at high altitude, some aircraft are equipped with booster pumps. Some turbine-powered aircraft have a fuel temperature indicator located in the flight deck to monitor the fuel temperature during high-altitude flight. When inspecting a fuel system, you should check all valves located downstream of boost pumps with the pumps operating. The type of fuel boost pump that separates air and vapor from the fuel before it enters the line to the carburetor is the centrifugal type pump. On large aircraft pressure refueling systems, a pressure refueling receptacle and control panel will permit one person to fuel or defuel any of the fuel tanks of an aircraft. When routing a fuel line between two rigidly mounting fittings, the line should have at least one bend between such fittings. Which of the following tests can determine an aviation gasoline's tendency to vapor lock? Read vapor pressure test. Microbial growth is produced by various forms of microorganisms that live and multiply in the water interfaces of jet fuels. Which of the following could result if microbial growth exists in a jet fuel tank and is not corrected? Interference with fuel flow, interference with fuel quantity indicators, and electrolytic corrosive action in a metal tank. The vapor pressure of aviation gasoline is lower than the vapor pressure of automotive gasoline. What can be done to eliminate or minimize the microbial growth problem in an aircraft jet fuel tank? Use anti-icing and antibacterial additives. Microorganisms form a biofilm that can clog filters, corrode tank coatings, and degrade the fuel. They can be controlled by somewhat with the addition of what to the fuel? Biocides. What is the maximum vapor pressure allowable for an aircraft fuel? 7 psi. If a bladder-type fuel tank is to be left empty for an extended period of time, the inside of the tank should be coated with a film of engine oil. How may the anti-knock characteristics of a fuel be improved? By adding a knock inhibitor. Some electric motors have two sets of fuel windings wound in opposite directions so that the motor can be operated in either direction. One purpose of a growler test is to determine the presence of a shorted armature.